We've all come across this message here on the beatmap page at some point. Let me just enable English mode. There. This beatmap is currently not available for download. There's even another message that has the possibility of showing up. Portions of this beatmap have been removed at the request of a blah blah whatever. I don't know what would have caused the difference of the two, but the latter message still allows you to download the map just without the MP3 file presumably. Whereas with the first message, some of these still play what would have been the MP3 file in the preview section, but again, nothing is downloadable. When uploading a map, the game makes it pretty clear that you should have the permission to use whatever music you're planning on uploading. Even in the wiki, they clearly encourage mappers to ask the creators for permission, or to select music from the featured artist program. When a music artist sees that their song is being used without their permission, they may submit a DMCA request, which leads to the song getting removed. It's unclear whether or not players can map and rank these songs again, but that's a concern I'll be talking about when looking at these maps. This one's probably the most interesting map we'll be looking at in this video. It's a sound vortex version of the song, and in that game, the difficulties often have different sound effects that go with the music. And this map follows that same aspect. There's different MP3 files here for the different difficulty levels. Nowadays, the ranking criteria pretty much prevents anything like this from getting ranked again. So this is one of the few maps that I know having something like this. Another trend that used to happen years ago was the double level difficulties. In the KcHecKa 2012 map, all three of these are about the same level. Maybe not the top one, but still they're all pretty close in difficulty. This kinda happens in standard cell, when there's a lot of guest difficulties and you have multiple people making 5 or 6 star ones. For this map set, we have 2 exhaust difficulties of slightly different levels. It's weird because the lower one might actually be harder to SS because of this one pattern. But before we get into the patterns themselves, I want to mention how a lot of these maps back then, from 2014-2015, used to have these level numbers next to them. The level number varies so much from the star rating here. I wonder how they go about rating these. Is it done manually, or if there's a guide or system used from another game that they're going off of? The normal difficulty does have some SV changes in it. I would usually complain about this type of thing, but as long as it doesn't get in the way of actually setting a score, or it doesn't require any real memorization, then I guess it's not a problem. The advanced difficulty is more of the same stuff for both key counts. Where it gets weird is this exhaust difficulty. These patterns are disgusting, and I don't mean that in a good way. After practicing in the editor for a while, it's actually kind of hittable, but looking later into the map, there's a lot of jacks throughout here, particularly this section here. It's not too technical, but the strain here is rather high for a 3-star map. So that's probably why this difficulty has more SS scores. More people might be better at jacks than what the top difficulty has. No SV in this difficulty, so it really comes down to keeping up with the strain. The 7 key difficulty feels like a proper 4-star map here. Again, no SV, so it all comes down to the patterns. I really like a lot of these patterns. A lot of symmetry is used here, and it's really reminiscent of older 7 key ranked maps. It might be easier for newer players learning 7 key and how to hit big chords with many fingers like this, as the visual aspect of the map is simple to follow. I would avoid stuff like this though. It creates a weird turnaround that almost feels like a jack. A lot of these older maps are pretty garish for stuff like this and don't quite take into account playability and whatnot. Even stuff like this. A lot of mappers might get tripped up on layering and trying to keep every sound mapped consistently, 2 notes in this case. The patterns like this don't exactly happen anymore. Moving on to the next map. Please never do this. If it wasn't for this SV long note combination, I could probably have a no mod score by now. I really want to highlight the 4K difficulty. This chart was featured in the Nuclear Blast pack from Mania, and at the time, I thought it was really cool to see maps like this in Osu, as most maps at the time didn't ever look like this. This whole section pretty much goes on until the end of the map, so for newer players finally getting into 4 stars, this will definitely feel like a stamina map to them. While stamina is kind of a hard skill set to represent in Osu, because of pausing and everything, I do feel like these maps should have their difficulty represented in that regard. This definitely feels harder than most other 4-star maps. Okay, how did this happen? It's a 3-star map. That was about a year ago. I guess I struggled with the long notes, but if you really look at it, they're split up between the 2 hands. A lot of 10 key maps are structured like this. It really does simplify things a lot, and the map is visualized in a more comprehensible way. Even this section, it does seem like a lot of long notes all close to one another, but the symmetry keeps all of the movements fairly similar and repetitive. None of the long notes overlap or intersect, anything like that, and the BPM is a comfortable 177. While it might not be the most interesting way to represent the music, by restricting the layering like that, it's simple and fun to play. The other map set is just, yeah. Anyway, happy to fix this score. This map I did mention in a previous video before, highlighting the split staircases and all of that. Pretty much the same issue as a lot of these older maps. I guess when they were thinking of difficulty, they were more concerned about density, as a lot of these streams don't have chords in them, rather than the awkwardness. 2 sections of the map in particular, here, and here. I don't even know what you call this pattern. It's like a weird turnaround in combination with the long note. I always end up dropping combo here. And even if you do get lucky with the first one, you have to do it again later in the map. This really shouldn't be present in a 3-star map, so I'm glad newer maps are usually concerned with pattern playability for the lower difficulties. Literally just shifting over this group of notes and maybe this one, depending on what thumb the player is using, would make this way more playable. Kinda the reason why I don't like mapping 7 key, as the playability of many patterns can vary depending on what thumb the player is using. Even without adjusting this pattern, how unplayable it is can vary depending on which thumb is used, and whether or not the bracket motion will be present. The top difficulty gets pretty freaking hard for what's supposed to be a 4.9 5-star map. My score is not that great either. Look at these long anchors that happen during the KcHecKa time. I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but this induces a lot of strain to one side and makes hitting all of the notes around that anchor even more awkward. This whole map set is pretty weird in fact. It feels like a beginner, a hard, and an extra difficulty. There's so much of a gap between everything, and it feels like there was no consideration for actual playability or perceived difficulty by the player. But that's not to say it's bad, and we can see it's been well received by the majority of the players. It's an interesting and obscure map set that really challenges the player at all levels. Now for the last map set, and the main reason why I was making this video in the first place. This is probably my favorite song in all of Osu, but I'm left feeling a bit disappointed. The whole map set kind of feels incomplete. We have 4, 5, 6, and 7 key, but there's only 5 difficulties. I guess technically we would only need 2 more normal difficulties here to comply with the ranking criteria, but I feel like this song is complex enough to warrant 4-star difficulties to make for a full spread of 2, 3, 4, with potentially 12 difficulties in total. For each key count, there's different levels of hit sounding and how it combines with the background music, but since I play with 0 effect volume, that just leads to the song feeling empty. 4K HD. The first key of time is basically 2 patterns just repeated over and over. I'm all for repetition used in maps, especially if the song itself is repetitive, but there definitely could have been more expression used here. The second half focuses more on the synths here, so there's a lot more variation. I really like this part where it switches between 2 patterns here. My main complaint about this difficulty is the lack of chord usage, and there's too many jacks in some of these parts, which really doesn't fit the tone of the song in my opinion. Well, except this bridge part. 7K RD. What does RD even stand for? This difficulty is just awful. It relies too much on the hit sounding, which again won't always be present for players. The KcHecKa time is fine, though there probably could have been a better way at arranging the notes here, rather than grouping them up into 3s like this. Again, the hit sounding creates an entirely different rhythm that's quite different from the song itself. I like the way this part is represented in the descending staircases. Higher key counts allow for more expression like this compared to the 4-key diff. The ending burst is messy. Everything else in the difficulty is fine though. 6K MX, the best difficulty of them all, and really redeems the map set as a whole for how much it carries. I don't even like 6 key exceptionally like that. The rhythm doesn't change much with the hit sounds here. It sounds pretty close to the bass song. A little bit of repetition here in terms of which columns are being mapped to, but it does so in a way that mixes with the synths so that the patterns aren't exactly the same, plus a little bit of mirroring. This part is technically mapped backwards, but I usually play with mirror anyways. Only issue here is how long it takes for the map to start picking up. Even this mid section is kind of lacking in the notes, but everything past the middle is really nice. So yeah, as I said, this map left me a little bit disappointed. And even with all the previous maps on the list, they were all mapped nearly 10 years ago. So we kind of lose out on the chance to create newer map sets that are up to quality or use different key counts or anything. While I don't know the exact rules for most of these songs when it comes to DMCA removals, all of the DJ Max songs are flat out blacklisted and they won't even let you upload them to the site anymore. If there's been any changes or informations about the so-called blacklist or rules about DMCA songs, let me know in the comments. For now, we'll kind of just have to deal with these decade-old maps for a lot of these songs. Portions of this beat map have been removed at the request of the creator or thirds. What the f-